It's very exciting to welcome Dr. Willie McLeod and Pastor Carel Smith back to our podcast. As you guys know, we're covering Revelation, one of my favorite books, and I think part of it
Yes.
is because it's, yeah, absolutely. It's very intriguing and it's sort of topical at the moment, actually very topical. But before we get going, I just wanted to thank everyone that's been liking and sharing the videos. There was a huge jump in people sharing the YouTube video, so I really appreciate that. And if people can just really continue to do that, it's a really nice way to support the ministry. Well, to move forward, we're discussing chapter 7 now. We're looking at the 144,000. And prior to this discussion, I've had a bit of a discussion with people at my church, and yeah, everybody's really intrigued. I think the main question has always been who is the 144,000, which I think is a really interesting topic, lots of opinions. And then the other thing that I would like to sort of touch on when we have a moment is to talk about the Great Tribulation and why there's a great tribulation. What is the purpose? And, just getting you guys' perspective on it. So, yeah, to get us going, I'm going to hand over to Carel to start us off. You've been doing a bit of research. Hey, Carel.
Yeah, but I can never catch up with Willie, but I'm trying.
As long as we try our best, eh?
Okay. Right. We are now in Revelation chapter 7, and I will just read the first few verses to kick off. Revelation chapter 7, verse 1. After this, well, after this is the previous chapter that said, where the people said, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of the wrath has come, and who can stand? Interesting, the question, who can stand? And if you look at these two examples mentioned, it is people who can stand in God's presence. So after this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. It was interesting for me to see the power that the angels have over the creation. But this wind is connected to the coming judgment, and as we later will see, to the 7 trumpets. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, some people call it from the east, with the seal of the living God. Now, I connect that seal, for this angel will seal the 144, with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, do not harm earth or sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Now, obviously, there is a lot of discussion. Who are these 144,000? Is it Israel? Or some others say no, it refers just symbolically to the church. So maybe I can leave you guys to say something about that.
And I think that's something that's a good starting point to just debunk, that whole perspective of who the 144,000 is, and and the fact that some people say it's the church. Personally, I don't agree with that, but I'll hand over to Willie to unpack that.
Maybe let me just mention something also. It seems as though the coming judgment is paused until these people are sealed.
Yes.
You have the very same situation in Ezekiel chapter 9, where God has sent angels to judge the city, but only those who sighed and groaned over all the abominations committed in the city, those were marked with a seal before the judgment comes, and they will be protected. So
Yes.
I think there's a strong connection between Ezekiel 9 and what we see here.
And I think there's two things that stand out is that they are dedicated to serving God, and that's in chapter 7, verse 3, and chapter 14, verse 4 to 5. And the other thing is God's seal will spare them from judgment and death.
Yeah, so I think what is important in my view is that one should remember the previous chapter. We've seen that the first 6 seals with which the book of the prophecy was sealed. When we compare it with the prophecy in Matthew, the prophetic discourse, Matthew chapter 24, we have seen that there's a close agreement, and it seems to be a kind of overview of the things to come that we find in the previous chapters. So the previous chapter is a kind of overview, and now we come to the point where there's a much more detailed exposition of what is going to happen. Now that starts with the first trumpet, but that's only in the next chapter. So what we find here is a kind of a focus. Often throughout Revelation, we'll see that the author focus on a particular, in this case, on the 144,000, and as well as those, we will see the multitude that comes from the Great Tribulation. And as we go through the book of Revelation, we'll find the same pattern. There's a certain focus. Sometimes the author breaks his process of discussing, for example, the seals or the trumpets and so forth, and then he'll first focus. It's like a certain kind of play with major happening that is actually in a certain way depicted for us, for the viewer. And 2 things are displayed here, are depicted in this case. The first is the 144,000, and the second group is the multitude. Now, what is the big difference between these 2 groups? It's quite interesting. The first group, the 144,000, we read that they comes from the tribes of the children of Israel that were sealed, and all the different tribes are mentioned here in great detail. So that gives us reason to believe that this pertains to the people of Israel, and most likely those among the Israelites that truly serve the Lord. Whether they will only be Messianic Jews, I'm not sure about that, but surely they will be people that really serve the Lord. One would be inclined to think it's Messianic Jews spoken of here.
Yes.
But then in contrast, in the next sort of exhibition that we find here, the next great moment that is focused on is this multitude, a great multitude who no one could count. And listen, it says, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. So whereas the first group is clearly depicted as Israelites, the next group, the second group, is clearly depicted as being from all different nations and tribes and peoples. So this is the contrast. So I think there cannot be any doubt that the second group refers to the church in its totality, mostly from all the heathen nations, whereas the first group refers to people within Israel, because the reason why Israel was also focused on is that the events that we will discuss as we proceed through the book of Revelation, many of these events will focus and will happen in Jerusalem. So these people will be really affected by those events. So when we read that the angels are said to hold back the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, the sea, or any tree, and then a little bit later, the 4 angels that was granted to harm the earth and the sea, and it says, do not harm the earth, the sea, the trees, So all these things are actually being harmed when we read that the trumpets are blown. So that's in the next chapter, chapter 8. So from chapter 8, all these things will start happening. So before those things happen, we read that a certain group of people are sealed in the sense of being protected so that they are not harmed. We read here, they're sealed on they're servants of our God. So they're servants of our God. So they're really seriously serving God. And they're sealed on their foreheads. And the reason is clearly that they are not harmed. This is also what we read here.
Willie, can I ask a question? So the 144,000 will have a seal. What about the great multitude?
So this sealing is only pertaining to the Israelites, this 144,000. So in what we'll come back to them actually later on in chapter 14. There's another situation where they are the focus, and we'll return to them. But in my view, they only pertain, it says that 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. This is clearly stated here. So I believe that they are the ones. Who they are exactly is not clearly revealed. Many things, as we proceed through the book of Revelation, you will see there are many things that are not clearly revealed to us. And we'll have to wait and see what it actually means. But in this case, it says that they are servants of God. They are protected against the things that will happen. So what are the things that will happen? We'll discuss that from the next session when we start talking about the trumpets. So what does the trumpets refer to? That's the major question. But we'll just let it stand till next time. But it includes wars and all sorts of terrible things that will happen on earth. So they are sealed, they are protected throughout this period. So whether they are only Messianic Jews, I'm not sure about that. What is the meaning of servants of God in this context with John writing? Perhaps it does refer to the children of God, people who are saved and have believed in Jesus Christ. And my inclination is also to think in that way. So they are the ones that's protected. And 144,000 is not a lot. It's actually a very small amount from the total amount of people in Israel.
12,000 per tribe.
Yeah.
Now, I heard another meaning of one of these commentaries that there's a possibility that the 12,000 per se is also of symbolic value, that it means, let's say, the complete number of the people of that tribe who believes will be protected. What do you think about that?
Yeah,
that it will not be precisely that number per se, but it's a symbolic number.
Yeah, we'll find other numbers also later on in the book of Revelation. For example, 1,260 days. And the question is whether that is actually to be taken literally or not. We'll come to that. But my inclination is that we should take it seriously. It's not impossible that there's a secondary meaning. But remember, we've previously talked about this idea of a secondary meaning. So in the Jewish interpretation, before Philu, Philu lived in about 30 after Christ. And his view was very much a new perspective. He was very much influenced by the Greek philosophy. And it started from there, slowly but steadily influencing Jewish philosophy and thinking, but not yet Christian philosophy and thinking. So when St. John wrote this book, I believe that this way of thinking, this looking for a deeper meaning and interpretation, which is very much a Greek thing, has not yet entered the Christian way of doing. And even the larger Jewish perspective on reading the scriptures. So when we look at the history of the method of interpretation, the only method that the Jews knew was a literal method. That doesn't mean there are not symbols involved and that did not incorporate symbols. And we've seen already in some of the previous talks, for example, Jesus are being depicted with the symbol of a lamb that's been slaughtered in heaven. So symbols are all over the place, but that doesn't mean everything has to be symbolized. We must have this fine balance between these two. So I can't say that this is the only right way to read Revelation. Obviously, I can't do that. But my inclination, again, is to take this serious that only a small group of the people of Israel, and this is, I think this pertains not to all the people all over the world that is Jewish. It's primarily those in Jerusalem, those in Israel, in my view, because that's the place that will be very severely they'll severely be influenced by these events. These things will have a severe impact on their lives. And it's in that context that I believe we should understand it.
It makes a lot of sense if you mention Jerusalem, because the text in Ezekiel 9 was also in Jerusalem where the judgment came. And as you also said, sorry, these are events which is like blown up because it's important. And so it makes sense that those people who will be there, they will be marked and protected at that time.
Yeah, and we find something similar with the next group, those coming, the multitude from the Great Tribulation. And we read, when we read this passage, we read that these people are those that came from the Great Tribulation. We read in chapter 7, verse 14, and I said to him, Sir, let me just go back one verse 13. Then one of the elders answered and saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. So he said to me, These are the ones who come out of the Great Tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. They are truly saved, a part of the church. And then we read that God will dwell among them, and in verse 16, they shall neither hunger anymore, nor thirst anymore. So they have been in very difficult circumstances. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So they come out of the Great Tribulation. So this is fascinating. So it means that these two, this chapter 7, in these two beautiful descriptions, one of the 144,000 people that are I'll come back to this, but in my view are within Jerusalem and the vicinity of Jerusalem, that are being protected for things to come, from things to come. And this great multitude, this is also have reference to the things that is going to happen from the next chapter 8, when we see how that, when the trumpet is being blown. Now, what is interesting, and this is the important point, we have previously mentioned that that Revelation, for example, in chapter 6, there's a lot of agreement with the prophetic discourse, especially Matthew 24. And this is again what we find. Yeah. The only other place in the Bible where we find this particular expression, Great Tribulation, is in Matthew 24. And there we read, I can read just a few verses, chapter 24, verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, and we'll come back to this. This is something that will happen in the temple. It says, standing in the holy place. That's in the temple. So these things pertain to the temple that will be rebuilt in Jerusalem and things happening in Jerusalem. And then he proceeds, let then those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And then he speaks about these terrible times. Woe to those who are pregnant, those who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter on the Sabbath. And then there will be great tribulation, such as had not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. So what we find here is there's something that's happened in Jerusalem, the abomination of desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel. That's in Daniel chapter 9. And we'll come back and we'll discuss that. So what he says, what Daniel, the prophet Daniel spoke about, is something that will happen in the period shortly before my second coming, because this whole passage pertains to the second coming. We've already seen the disciples ask a question about the second coming, and if we read a little bit further, we read how Jesus will come with great power and glory. And so these things happen and pertain to the time of the second coming. And just so what we find is after this thing happens, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, standing in the holy place, then what will happen is these people will be in very difficult circumstances. Clearly, it's the Jews living in Jerusalem. And then we read, and then there will be great tribulation. So the great tribulation follows directly on this particular event, the abomination of desolation that will occur in the temple. Now, what this means, we'll come back to this and we'll discuss it in much more detail later on, especially when we come to chapter 11. But this pertains to Jerusalem, events in Jerusalem, the building of the temple. Maybe the Antichrist will come to the temple, do certain things in the temple, exactly in the same way that things happened in earlier times. For example, in the time of King Antiochus the fourth, that period. But anyhow, but after this event, he says, and then will be the great tribulation.
That's the switch that gets flipped that leads to everything else.
Absolutely. So this particular event in Jerusalem, so it pertains to two groups of people, those in Jerusalem and the vicinity and the direct area, which will be mostly Jews. And then he says they are servants of God. So it's Jews serving God. So maybe it refers to Messianic Jews. And then the other group is worldwide. We'll come to that also. And this is the church, the global church, that will, during that same period, experience a massive tribulation, which is called the Great Tribulation, as has never been before and will never happen again.
So then I can just confirm again, the 144,000 is not the church. You're talking about the great multitude.
Yeah, so this contrast between these two groups is, to me, anyhow, it's not the same. Why would you just repeat the same thing, just in a different way? It makes sense to me. And mentioning all the different tribes, except actually for one tribe, that's not mentioned.
Yes, can we have a bit of a quick chat about that? I don't know if you guys wanted to go into depth, because there is a bit of a shift, and then perhaps just mention the allotments.
Yeah, so the tribe of Dan is not mentioned. And biblical scholars through the ages, there have been some of them that have been of the opinion that maybe the final Antichrist will be from the tribe of Dan. That also, I think, follows from the prophecy that we find in Genesis 49, where Jacob blesses his sons, and then after he blesses all of them, comes to Dan, and he says, verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. And then he says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that its rider shall fall backward. And then I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. So this is quite interesting, the comparison of Dan with the serpent next to the way striking the horse. Quite similar to what we find, in Genesis chapter 3, where we read that the snake will also bite the Messiah or the seed of the woman at the heel. So this is quite interesting. It's a very similar image. And I think this is the reason why certain scholars believe that the Antichrist will be from the tribe of Dan.
Yeah, there's also
I myself don't have a strong view on this. I'm not sure whether this is important or not.
Dan was also involved in idol worship, if you read it, Judges chapter 18.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, they had some images there that were worshipped.
Yeah.
They really departed from Yahweh.
Yeah, but other tribes also did that, you know, the Benjaminites, you know, they transgressed in a very serious manner. And so one can't really say that Dan was particularly wicked. I would say the Benjaminites were even more wicked than the Danites. But somehow, this particular aspect, the fact that Dan is not mentioned, has drawn attention. Maybe
it is also interesting that the 12,000, the tribe starts with Judah and not with Reuben, because the Messiah came from the tribe of Judah.
Yeah, but this is also, if you read in this passage, you know, where Jacob places the different all these different sons, then the first three, you know, Reuben, Simon, and Levi, because of different things that they have done in the past, they are kind of disqualified to be the firstborn. And then the first one that comes after those three are Judah. So he is then actually given the portion of the firstborn, not the double portion, because the double portion goes actually to Joseph, the firstborn of his second wife. But what he did get is the messianic promise. So Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. And Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. And so forth. So, and he's then also described as a lion. So the reason why he is actually placed first is because in this passage where Jacob has blessed his sons, he is the one that got the birthright, the firstborn, and he get the blessing that was usually preserved for the firstborn.
And maybe that's the very reason why the Messiah came from the firstborn, the new firstborn tribe.
Yeah, I believe so. Actually, that was the blessing went to Judah, and the blessing included the seed, the big promise that's involved, that's included in the blessing that goes to the first son. But what is interesting, and this is actually a topic for another day, but the double portion that usually also went to the firstborn actually went not to him, but to Joseph and to his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And they are actually both mentioned. Joseph,
yes.
Joseph mentioned, but with Joseph
and
also is Manasseh.
Yeah, there seems to be this mention of Joseph, and then Joseph splits into Ephraim and Manasseh, I assume, and then back to Joseph.
So it's actually Ephraim and Manasseh that's been referred to.
Yeah. The tribe of Levi, they do not get an allotment. Any comment on that, Carel?
No, I don't think it's applicable here. It's just mentioned as one of the tribes.
Yeah, just mentioned. Yeah, because the allotment comes from God, or God is their allotment. Yeah. It's just one of the questions that I received as well.
Oh, okay.
What also was interesting for me is the great multitude took part in worshiping God in heaven. They didn't go to Hades or something. They were before the throne after they died. And they were part of worshiping God at the throne with the angels. Verse 10 says, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. I don't know if you know that song. Salvation belongs to our God. There's a lovely song that really taken from this scripture. And then the angels, they were also worshiping, saying, blessing or our praise and glory, wisdom and thanks and honor and power to our God. And it's also, it was striking to me that this very scene in heaven is very much the same as, what you read in chapter 4 and 5, where the angels were standing around the throne, around the elders and the four living creatures. They fell on their faces before the throne and worshiping God. It's the very same scene as the previous chapters, as if it was happening at that moment when John was looking. So this is a very amazing scene taking place in heaven from the people who came out of the Great Tribulation and experiencing the presence of the Lamb himself, his protection, and his really just comforting them in heaven. They came out of this great tribulation.
So they're before the throne, yeah. And I think this is also already in the previous chapter, in chapter 6, we've seen that the martyrs, they appear before, next to the altar, before the throne. So this is the first reference to these very same people that you find described here. But now we read that they actually came from the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation, we've already discussed this, but we've seen that in Matthew. The reference is to the pains that the woman experienced before giving birth. It gets more and more intense until the moment of birth. And the most intense is actually just before birth. And this is what we find here. The most intense moment. There will be many tribulations throughout time. The church in many countries has been persecuted. Many have been killed throughout the ages. But this will be the great tribulation. This will be the most severe tribulation ever. And he actually says this quite clearly in Matthew 24, as that never been and will never be.
So that brings me back to my comment when we first started, and the question I had is what's the purpose of the Great Tribulation? Why did God decide to, usher us into this time period?
Two things is important, and we will return to this. On the one hand, we have the wrath of God. On the other hand, we have the tribulation. And the tribulation is not the same as the wrath. But when it comes to the wrath of God, we have to distinguish between the direct wrath of God. So things that pertains to his direct wrath. And things that's indirect. Now, let me take an example. When Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem, it was the wrath of God.
Yeah.
But it was indirect. It was through Nebuchadnezzar that God actually chastened Israel. So I believe in Revelation we find the same thing. There are many things that will happen, but it is not things that refers to necessarily to this severe and direct wrath of God. And in that sense, it can also refer to wars and things happening on earth, in the way that we've seen in the previous chapter, referring to peace that was taken away, and war that will really be severely all over the world, the street wars and the hunger, famine, pestilence, all these things. These are the things that described. So I believe in a certain sense, many of these things are, God allows these things upon the world, but it's not yet his final wrath. And I think that's very important for us to make this distinction, because the tribulation is not the same as the wrath. And what is being referred to here is the tribulation. And it says that all these people will come from that period, during which the Great Tribulation, that's the name given to this period. And we've seen in Matthew 24, it's after this event that will happen in Jerusalem. the abomination of desolation. Then will it be the great tribulation. And when we start discussing the trumpets, then we'll definitely look more carefully into the details of everything that's pertaining to this.
Carel, anything to add to that specific topic?
Yes, you asked what is the purpose of the Great Tribulation. I see in it also something of the spiritual battle, the spiritual war going on. And it is so amazing that many of the themes in the Bible actually, are drawn into this end time play. For instance, when the people left Egypt, with the plagues in Egypt, you can see the similarities. It was this war, it became more intense. God was actually warring the gods of Egypt until the death of the firstborn, which was the most severe, and it was then it broke the power of the Pharaoh, and God took his people and they left. But you could see the build up as the end was coming closer. So in this tribulation, it's also something of this great war going on between God and the fallen angels and the powers of this earth, and in the end that powers will be broken and conquered. But through it all, it will be a time of God's wrath, but also judgment of the peoples, but also of the fallen angels.
Yeah.
So it's this build up, and it's amazing to see how it all flows together in the end with all these different images, the birth pangs and the birth of the end times and of the new heaven and the new earth, as Willie described it so amazingly.
Yeah, I think what is also important is to remember that the Lord promised that he will protect us from his wrath. He will not be in his wrath. But we do read that persecution is very much part of the Christian life. Take, for example, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12. Yes, and all who desire to live godly in Jesus Christ will suffer persecution. They will suffer persecution. So persecution and tribulation is something that's from the beginning was part of the life of the church. And everybody that want to live a godly life will suffer in some way, will suffer persecution. And I think as the end times comes closer, eventually we will see this great tribulation. But I think as we proceed, we will come back to this question and we will revisit it.
Yeah, absolutely. Any final thoughts, Willie and Carel?
No, I think when we get to the trumpets next time, then we'll start to proceed with the next aspect of the chronology as it unfolds in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, perfect. I'm looking forward to that. Carel?
Yeah, it was just amazing again, as Willie mentioned, and reminded us that the first 6 seals were like an overview. And now we are really getting into the detailed actions, what will take place. And we zoom in to these 2 different aspects of what will take place. And what is encouraging is that before these great intense times of suffering will come, the Lord will mark his people and he will protect them. So before the intense time really gets to it, the Lord will make sure that his own are protected. It is really encouraging to read that, to know that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. He takes care of his people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I think this is very interesting, intriguing, and enjoyable. Again, I just wanted to remind everybody, please take time to just click like and share. I'm in Canada, and they're trying to censor a lot of things, so the only way to get the message out is to really like and share. And there's a little notification button as well. You can even click that. But thank you very much. And any questions, again, info at the Bible GPS. That's the link. And lots of additional information if you scroll down to the bottom of the video on Willie's blog, and some really awesome information as well. But thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lebe.
It was our pleasure.
For more information about the Bible GPS, please visit our website at thebiblegps.com. Please subscribe to our channel, share the video, like it, and leave us a comment. You can also support our ministry by donating. All the information is in our website. Thank you and God bless.